If you like the work we do here at Black Flag India and want to support us financially, please check out the links in the video description. A little help will go a long way. To the wonderful people who have already pitched in, thank you. I love you and I'm eternally grateful to you. If you can't contribute or don't want to, that's alright. Please like, share, comment and subscribe.
It's pure ideology.
Dear Shekhar, for too long I have put off talking about you, because to talk about you I would have to understand you, and understand you I did not. Let me be clear, to spend any amount of time attempting to understand you, Shekhar Gupta, is to condemn one's mind to crippling exasperation. Fools like me who put our minds to this problem, we wade through the vast fecal swamp of your intellectual output, stumbling through your stories, interviews, columns, videos, trying to make some sense of your theories and beliefs. Not all of us make it. Many are swallowed up by the swamp, driven to madness trying to understand you and your bewildering, contradictory brain. So why write to you now, you may ask? Do I understand you? I'm not sure, but I did have a breakthrough of sorts. A couple of months in, I realized I was going about this entire thing the wrong way. Till that point, I'd been reading about your ideas on politics and history, etc., hoping they'd open a window to your mind. But because there's such little consistency in your views, this strategy is quite unhelpful in understanding how your mind works. The only impression one gets is, yeah, his brain is a complete mess, which doesn't really satisfy me as an answer and is also really disrespectful to you. Disappointed, I would wade into your mind swamp once more, looking for something else in your voluminous body of work that would make everything coherent. It was around that time that I stopped sleeping. Not because I wasn't sleepy, I was really sleepy and exhausted. No, I was too scared to sleep because your giant bald head had started haunting me in my dreams. But after 3 sleepless days and nights, as I lay half dead in front of the computer, watching but not seeing one of your videos, it happened. Out of nowhere, a bolt of lightning in the dark sky, and for a split second I could see everything. I could see there was really no need to examine your garbage opinions, no need to worry about nothing making sense. I just had to listen. This was what I realized in my moment of clarity, that to understand you, I had to listen and learn about how you understand yourself, how you see your life and career within the context of India's post-independence historical development. So that's what I did. I listened and learned and pieced together a little story. Your story about yourself, a story which has you riding the crest of a wave of aspiration and prosperity, a story which is proof that neoliberal reforms guarantee economic mobility for everyone, a story in which you are both a mascot and an ambassador of free markets. It's a story which tells us of a middle-class boy from small-town Haryana who rose up the ranks of 2 of the country's most reputable media institutions, the Indian Express and India Today, armed not with a refined English accent, an Oxbridge degree and friends in high places, but with just a journalism degree from a regional university and his grit and ambition and dreams of doing better in life than his father. It's the classic story of the outsider, the provincial lad conquering the big city, the Hindi medium type as you describe yourself, striding comfortably in the corridors of power where once only Macaulay's great-great-great-grandchildren roamed. the old Nehruvian elite who cynically deployed socialism to perpetuate their rule and insulate themselves from any competition from below, thus keeping Middle India away from participating in writing independent India's history. But as the ideological screws loosened in the 80s and socialism was on the wane, the pent-up entrepreneurial abilities of Middle India were released and it burst forth on the historical stage, as its representatives rose to the top relying not on generational wealth nor on government dole, but on merit, forged and honed in the highly competitive private sector subject to the rigors of the marketplace. Embodying the ascendant spirit of Middle India were a group of entrepreneurs you identified as Hindi medium type or HMT stars, taking on the last bastion of elitism, the corporate world. And you picked out the Ambani brothers, Narayan Murthy of Infosys, Hero Group's Pawan Munjal, and Airtel founder Sunil Mittal as entrepreneurs from an HMT, small town, non-elite background who have risen where scions of so many former A-list families of corporate India are supporting their lifestyles merely by scavenging on the properties left behind by their parents. India's glorious future, you wrote way back in 2003, would be powered by free markets and HMTs. The moral of this entire story and this particular reading of history which one finds in your work is that markets are unambiguously good, markets reward merit, markets ensure wealth for all, and thus markets should remain free at all costs, and we should not heed any criticism of free markets because all such criticism is hypocritical and dishonest. Once I pieced this together, the enormity of its importance dawned on me. Examining this story is not just the key to understand you, but also the minds of a lot of upwardly mobile upper caste urban uncles like you who've made a lot of money in the last 30-40 years because they all believe some version of this tale. They all think they're the protagonist of an Ayn Rand novel, virtuous, meritorious wealth creators struggling to get to the top where they belong. And since it's these uncles who invariably occupy every position of power in every institution of the country, public or private, political or cultural, business or academia, this story has been elevated to the level of mythology by our ruling uncles and weaponized as an ideological defense of free markets. I know this is kind of speculative and out there, but I think it will be useful to expose this mythology to a little scrutiny for two reasons. First and foremost, to understand you, and second, to gain insight into the ideology of the Uncle Raj we live under. So let's start with a little demographic profile. All the corporate HMT stars you mentioned, the Ambanis, Narayan Murthy, Pawan Munjal and Sunil Mittal, they're all upper caste men. Now, I'm not trying to downplay this group's relatively humble origins, but upper caste men constitute around less than 10% of the population. Are you sure we should be celebrating if one tiny subset of uncles is replacing another at the top of the food chain? And let's not restrict ourselves to that short list. We need only pull up the latest rich lists of Indian billionaires or look at the leadership of industry bodies like FICCI and CII to find that HMT or non-HMT, the very, very top echelon of Indian business, is occupied almost entirely by upper caste men. You have your Ambani, Adani, Burman, Birla, Bajaj, Damani, Goenka, Hinduja, Jain, Jindal, Kotak, Munjal, Mittal, Murthy, and so on. The only other social group one finds at the apex of the corporate world are the old Parsi families, your Godrejas, Vadias, Tatas, Mistries, etc. And they're the quintessential old elite. So far, we've only looked at promoters of India's biggest companies here, which is obviously an extremely minuscule group of people. So let's expand our horizons a bit. A 2012 study by Ajit Donkar and Saxena looked at the caste composition of the boards of India's top 1,000 listed companies by asset value in both the public and private sector. They found out that out of a total of 9,052 individuals on the boards of these top corporations, 8,387 individuals or 92.6% of the total belong to upper castes, while the number of board members belonging to scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and other backward classes combined was just 665. Let me put that in perspective. These three groups, SC, ST and OBC, comprise, according to different estimates, somewhere between 70 to 75% of the Indian population. Their representation among arguably the most powerful 9,000 persons in the corporate sector was just 7.3%. The study also found that out of the 1,000 companies in the sample, 697 or nearly 70% had zero lower caste members on their boards. Noting that similar abysmal trends were visible with respect to gender diversity as well, the study concluded that Indian corporate boards continue to belong to the old boys club based on caste affiliation. So what you describe as the assault of Middle India on the tyranny of the upper crust is in reality an assault of middle class upper caste men. It constitutes some kind of progress, I guess, as the social base of our Uncle Raj has increased from the top 1 to 2% to the top 5 to 8%. But a radical restructuring of Indian corporate leadership it is not. Further, you attribute this very limited expansion of the uncle pool to forces of free markets and dismiss the notion that government intervention had anything to do with it. This betrays a very limited understanding of what government interventions are, is the provision of quality state subsidized education in accord with the directive principles of a little known document called the Constitution of India, and given form and structure by numerous expert commissions post independence, not a form of government intervention? In its absence, would middle class and lower middle class families be able to send their kids to study abroad, especially for higher education, as the kids of the old elites had done since the colonial period? Could young Narayan Murthy, son of a school teacher living in Mysore, follow the Birla scion Aditya Vikram Birla to MIT in the 1960s? No, but Murthy could go to IIT Kanpur, established by an Act of Parliament in 1959, where under the Kanpur Indo-American program, the institute received technical assistance from a consortium of 9 American educational institutions, including MIT. And under the program, IIT Kanpur received an IBM computer, becoming the first institute in the country to offer a computer science education to students like Narayan Murthy. Even second-generation entrepreneurs like Mukesh Ambani and Pawan Munjal, who came from families much better off than Murthy's, have availed of state-funded higher education. The former received his engineering degree from the Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai, and the latter from NIT Kurukshetra. It's not like you're unaware of the educational backgrounds of your corporate HMT stars, or have forgotten that you too earned your journalism degree from the government-funded Punjab University in Chandigarh. But you don't seem to perceive any contradiction in utilizing state resources to gain access to affordable higher education and then attributing yours and others' subsequent success in the private sector exclusively to free markets. If there was no government intervention in education, if education was treated not as a public good but as a purely profit-driven sector, middle class and lower middle class families like yours would have been simply priced out of the higher education market. And your climb up the socio-economic ladder would become even more difficult, if not impossible. However, to even be in a position to accept the benefits of state-subsidized higher education was an extremely fortunate accident of birth. An overwhelming majority of the country's population at independence was stuck in debt-driven poverty and or socially excluded from being considered worthy of basic human rights like education and occupational choice due to their status in the caste system. As such, they themselves did not have the education and resources that would have allowed them to access moderately well-paying and steady employment necessary to educate the next generation, in the absence of which their kids would have to join the workforce in low-paying jobs as soon as they could to supplement the family income. That was the point of reservations and public education, to initiate a breakdown of the cycle of poverty and exclusion. Progress on this front, though, was very slow and unsatisfactory, and as a result, it was the relatively privileged section of society who benefited disproportionately from employment and education opportunities in newly independent India. They were the ones who could read and write, which only 18% of the population could do according to the 1951 census, and among them, those who could read and write English, which was necessary to be eligible for even a low to mid-level job in government or the private sector, were minuscule in number. Based on the state of education in India at the time, we can estimate that the number of English-speaking Indians was only a fraction of 1% of the population. To this, we can add the men of the trading classes, numbering not more than 1 or 1.5% of the population, who had the social and financial capital to own and run small and medium family businesses. At the dawn of independence then, only a very tiny minority of families had the resources and social status required to send their kids to college. Of course, this minority was not a uniform, homogeneous group. Within it were the cosmopolitan and elite elements, the top bureaucracy, upper management of domestic and multinational private corporations, big industrialists, and remnants of the old feudal order of the princely states. Below them was Middle India, in reality the lower section of the upper class, the social base of our upwardly mobile upper caste urban uncles, sons of government servants, either mid-level employees of public sector companies or the lesser bureaucracy like you, Shekhar. Senior Gupta ji retired a gazetted government officer in Haryana, which never ceases to amuse me because of your hatred of big government. Or they belong to business families like the Ambanis and Munjals, or to families of regional politicians like Airtel Sunil Mittal, whose father Satpal Mittal was a Rajya Sabha member and a powerful political figure from Ludhiana in Punjab. Another category was rural land-holding classes turned agrarian capitalists, particularly in the core green revolution regions, who relied on government marketing and procurement infrastructure to enable their kids to move into the non-agricultural sector. And then there were the people that provided a whole range of services to both these groups: the doctors, lawyers, school and college teachers, retailers, traders, etc. Now I know what you're thinking. How dare a privileged, misinformed millennial like me say you belong to the lower upper class, implying implying that you guys had it easy back then, that I cannot even fathom the troubles and hardships you guys went through trying to hustle your way up the socioeconomic ladder. But I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that you old boys didn't work hard. I'm not saying that you waltzed into life and everything was presented to you on a platter. I know you worked your ass off reporting from conflict zones in Punjab, Assam and Sri Lanka. I could never do that. And yeah, I'm sure Sunil Mittal and Narayan Murthy worked 20-hour days to build their companies up, and Mukesh Ambani and Pawan Munjal worked equally hard to grow and expand their father's business empires. All I'm saying is that you guys were much, much closer to the top of the ladder than you ever were to the bottom. I know it sounds outrageous to say that for someone who came from either a small town or the poor part of the city, someone whose family could only afford to live a life of austerity, who received their early education in a government school. I know it's outrageous to say that you guys were much closer to the big city, English-speaking elite living a life of unbridled luxury. But as I've tried to show above, it's true. 2 centuries of colonial rule which did little to alter the highly stratified structure of Indian society, and in fact rested on the complicity of the upper classes for stable and efficient appropriation of the wealth produced by the rest, created a situation that at the time of independence, an overwhelming majority of the country's population did not even have what you guys had, both in terms of resources and social status. This is why I think the story you believe in, which locates the source of upward mobility in free market reforms, is not just wrong, but quite possibly the opposite of what actually happened. It's true that the reforms opened up new sectors of the economy for private investment. As we've seen though, those who built their fortunes in these sectors, either as managers or entrepreneurs, often relied crucially on the much hated pre-reform states' resources and policies to do so, especially in the form of employment for their parents and educational opportunities for themselves. But the same neoliberal reforms initiated a reorientation of the Indian state, which means adhering to the doctrine of fiscal responsibility and curtailing its expenditure, so that government resources dedicated to providing educational and employment opportunities are no longer available to the extent that they were when you guys used them. The post-reform period has seen growth of total real public expenditure on education slowing down considerably. While in the 1950s and 60s, public expenditure on education grew at around 12%, it grew at a much slower rate, between just 4 to 6% in the last 3 decades, despite much higher GDP growth in the latest period. Correspondingly, private expenditure on education has grown faster than public expenditure, reflecting not just the expansion of the private education sector, but also the higher cost of obtaining education. Greater private expenditure on education is often interpreted as a change in preference among households in favor of high-quality private education over the dysfunctional public education system, which they can now afford due to India's stellar economic growth in the post-reform period. To meaningfully exercise such a choice, households must have some disposable income over and above the minimum expenditure required to obtain the basic necessities of life for their families. In 2015, the 7th Pay Commission calculated that the decent wage for ensuring a healthy and dignified standard of living to be 18,000 rupees per month. One can reasonably assume that households earning more than this amount might be the ones who could consciously direct their disposable income towards obtaining expensive private education for their children. A 2015-16 Labour Ministry survey showed that only 7% of rural households and 27% of urban households reported monthly earnings of more than 20,000 rupees. 67% or 2/3 of households at the all India level reported earnings of less than 10,000 rupees per month. At such a low level of earnings, privatization of education means that parents must bear the higher cost of private education by either prioritizing the education of one or more of their children at the expense of others, and or curtailing expenditure on other necessities like health and nutrition. That most working people in this country face this awful choice is partially down to the absolutely abysmal record of employment generation in post-reform India, particularly in creating well-paying, secure jobs. Employment trends have been so dismal that between 2004-05 and 2017-18, a period of impressive GDP growth in which around 25 million people entered the labor force, the net increase in the number of employed persons was less than 6 million, leading to a near threefold spike in the number of unemployed persons from 10 million to 30 million, and this pathetic situation has been unsurprisingly worsened by COVID. Neoliberal dogma, however, prevents governments from intervening in the economy to eradicate or at least limit unemployment. In fact, in India's case, the government has actually contributed to job losses. Between 1961 and 1991, public sector employment increased by 170%, from 70 lakhs to 1.9 crores. Since 1991, though, public employment at all levels, central, state and local, as well as employment in public sector enterprises and state utilities, have all either plateaued or registered a fall. Between 1991 and 2012, central government employees fell by 25%, those of state governments remained stagnant, local governments shed 8.5% of their employees, and individuals working in PSCs and public utilities fell by 7.5%. Total public employment in 2012 stood at 1.76 crores, down 14.5 lakh from 1991. Contrary to what people like you believe, the public sector in India is quite small compared to other countries. Public sector employees form less than 4% of the total workforce in India, whereas the average for the rich OECD countries is nearly 18%. Number of public employees in India per 1,000 population is one of the lowest in the world, lower even than comparable countries. Brazil stands at 111 public employees per 1,000 population, China at 57 and India at 16. Clearly, employment at state and local levels has not kept up with the growth of the population, resulting in the deterioration of delivery of public services to citizens. Even within the shrinking pool of public sector employees, there is a trend towards reduction in the number of long-term regular employees and an increase in short-term contractual employees. In central public sector enterprises, the share of contract employees increased from 22% in 2011-12 to 34% in 2017-18. And this trend of worsening pay and quality of employment generalizes to other categories of public employment as well. The predicament of ASHA workers demanding to be regularized during the pandemic is perhaps one of the most intolerable manifestations of this trend. The fall in public employment has also impacted historically oppressed communities disproportionately. Between 2004-5 and 2018-19, total employment in central PSCs fell by 10%, whereas the number of employees belonging to scheduled castes fell by almost 24%. Those belonging to scheduled tribe fell by 12.5%. The proportion of OBC employees, though, remained the same in this entire period. Further, it is remarkable that in the midst of a decades-long employment crisis, successive governments at the center and state level have even failed to fill vacancies in posts that have been approved for hiring. Estimates suggest that currently there are around 60 lakh posts under both center and state governments that have been sanctioned but not filled. And these posts include teachers and healthcare workers, jobs that we desperately need as a country but are clearly not the priority for numerous governments. All these trends add up to a symbolic kicking away of the ladder by your generation. I'm not saying the pre-reform period was some shiny utopia and the uncles that ruled over your generation were benevolent saints. No, the regime they presided over was pretty bad. Most importantly, in my opinion, because they were unable and unwilling to use the transfer of power from the British as an opportunity for a radical social transformation of Indian society, and as a result, the Indian state was largely constrained in realizing the laudable but inadequate social and economic egalitarianism enshrined in the constitution. So whatever little good was in that regime accrued to only a tiny sliver of the population, to people like you, who ironically hate it the most, and have now ensured that those benefits are just not available anymore, even though people desperately need them. You used government resources to climb up to the top, but now government resources are better used for giving tax breaks to corporations and signing public-private partnerships. So parents today have to sacrifice on health and nutrition to pay private school and college fees. But at least the kid will find a stable, well-paying job if they get educated, right? Maybe, or maybe their kid will swell the ranks of the educated unemployed in the country. In 2018-19, more than 30% of young graduates and postgraduates were unemployed. Tough luck to them if they applied for a permanent government job, because they'll be competing with millions for a handful of posts. And if they do manage to find employment in the private sector, you want to make sure they don't have the job security, benefits and bargaining power that you guys had, because the labor laws that provide these are hurting investment and we need to get rid of them. And in fact, we need to do it when the workforce is completely battered and desperate and unable to retaliate, like during a pandemic-induced lockdown. The crisis is an opportunity, right?
There is no such thing as a good crisis. Every crisis is bad. But there is a saying in English, never waste a good crisis.
And while we're at it, let's completely dismantle whatever remnants of government support and regulation exist in agriculture. The state-sponsored Green Revolution dream, which largely excluded the lower peasantry and agricultural laborers even in its heyday, is now decidedly over. Those greedy farmers and laborers need to learn how to compete with highly subsidized agricultural producers in Europe and North America. And if they can't do it, fine. They can either kill themselves or migrate to cities where they can live in slums and ghettos and become a part of the cheap, hyper-exploited migratory urban labor force, working construction sites, sweatshops, gig economy jobs, retail and domestic work, etc. Meanwhile, most of the uncles are happily supporting and cheerleading a government whose main achievements in the last 7 years have been the mass production and reproduction of hatred, an acceleration of the upward transfer of wealth, catastrophic mismanagement of the pandemic, needless and entirely avoidable misery inflicted on the poor and vulnerable, and the criminalization of all the undesirables in the population. And that's going to keep getting worse, and the uncles are going to keep keep loving it. All this is happening at a time when the planet's capacity to sustain global capitalism and its unquenchable thirst for resources is simply exhausted. The oceans are full of plastic, the forests are on fire, extreme weather events are increasing in frequency, sea levels are rising, the ice caps are shrinking, the permafrost is melting, entire habitats and species have been destroyed, and millions are threatened, and our air, water, and soil are choked with pollutants. The glorious future you promised us has clearly not materialized, but now we might not even have a future. Also, a few uncles can buy fancy toys and organize mega Bollywood weddings for their children, and the slightly less wealthy brethren can sit in their gated communities dreaming of Ram Rajya while the world outside turns to ashes. The real ideology of Uncle Raj then is what Adam Smith in his time called the vile maxim of the masters of mankind: all for ourselves and nothing for other people. This is who you are, who I understand you to be. The vilest of masters, embodying everything that is awful about our Uncle Raj and possessing in abundance all the worst qualities of the uncles who rule over us. First, the relentless pursuit of wealth and influence, which is all your journalism has always been about. Second, the ridiculous overestimation of one's own intellectual capabilities, which allows you to never confront the reality that if we actually did live in a meritocracy, your place would be near the bottom. And lastly, open contempt and hostility towards the country's working people, who must not only be brutally exploited, but their poverty and distress should be used as an opportunity to exploit them even further. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you really just are a dumb, greedy, hateful piece of which is not really a great revelation, and I probably did not need to write a 4500 words long video letter just to say something so obvious. But I guess I had to get all this out of my system, and I have got it all out. I think it may have caused irreparable brain damage, but I think that's all I have to say. So this is me signing off. Oh, one last thing. F*** you, Shekhar.